What I'd like to do now is invite Eric Rudder to come, and he's our Executive Vice President for Advanced Strategy and Research for Microsoft. Eric Rudder is responsible for the company's overall technology strategy, technology policy, and forward-looking development efforts, and he also oversees Microsoft Research, as well as other activities like the Trustworthy Computing Group, Technology Policy, and Startup Business Group, for example. So, Eric, ladies and gentlemen, Eric Rudder. Eric, great.
Thank you.
All yours.
Well, good morning. Thanks for joining us today. I think one of the key things for the Faculty Summit is it really gives us a chance to really create more opportunities to collaborate better together. And I want to thank you guys, because in the past, you've really pushed us to think about collaborating in new and interesting ways. It was actually at one of the earlier faculty summits a few years ago that folks came up to us and said, you know, that Kinect sensor, it's really cool. I'd really love to use it with some of my students or some of my own research. You know, why can't you just make it available for us to use? And we went and we were like, yeah, that's kind of right. And we went back and we built the Kinect SDK. And got a tremendous amount of collaboration and support. And so those types of ideas and that type of brainstorming that comes out of the event is really important to us. And I encourage you to share the feedback, share the verbatims on the survey, because we really do think about new ways to collaborate. I think going forward, there's a lot of new technologies and ideas in terms of collaborating together to share data. I know we're actually working with some of you in the audience on a new research collaboration literally around some of the code analytics for all of Microsoft's code base. We call the internal system code mine. Sometimes you may have heard the group TSC. But we've taken that data, shared it, made it available. And now that we have amazing cloud services with Azure, I think the ability to take some of our large data sets that we use in research or some common industry data sets that we all use, like ImageNet that we talked about in the video. I think there's a lot of ideas that we can talk back and forth about in terms of collaborating together. So I encourage you to take that to heart and to work together with us and challenge us on what the best way we can collaborate together is. The other thing that was interesting when I was thinking about some of the feedback is you told us to involve more people in the summit. I think we've worked really hard to get folks across the company and across MSR here. I know our internal attendance is up more than 50%, so hopefully you'll get a chance to make a good connection with someone in Microsoft Research or in the product group. In the be careful what you ask for tenet, I know Peter Lee at the All Hands actually encouraged the Microsoft Research group to sink the boat tonight. I don't think we necessarily want to sink the boat, but I do think there'll be a ton of folks. And the other thing is with colleagues, I know it's hard to get everyone in the room at the same time, but with the virtual summit we have streaming now, we have about 3,000 people participated last year, and we expect thousands to see this material as well. So I think there's lots of opportunities going forward. With that, I actually want to go to the last thing you asked us for, is to increase the time you get with senior Microsoft leaders. And so my main duty today is to introduce Bill. He's a man who needs no introduction, but he is a man who has a daughter who's thinking about college next year. I know this is typically summertime when we kind of do college visits and gather up all that material. Many of you work at universities. You might have some of those pamphlets. I encourage you to leave a little stack on top, and maybe we can save Bill some time for him joining us today. But I think he'll do a great session. Then we'll have a little Q&A with Bill and Rick. So thank you for coming, and please welcome Microsoft Chairman Bill Gates.
Well, good morning. It's great to be here. I haven't been here for over 5 years, so it's great to see the way this event has grown. And I think it's fair to say that we're in a golden age of computer science. The original vision of Microsoft, that we ought to dream about what software could do if we had infinite computing and infinite storage, that almost is our reality today. And so it's amazing for me to see how that's being applied, whether it's user interface, with vision, speech, pen, with modeling in rich data areas, with machine learning. It really seems like that idea of the powerful assistant that can help us get things done, help us derive deep insights, that the progress we'll make in the next 5 years and 10 years will be really unbelievable. Even our friends in the hardware industry are giving us better screens, better sensors, things that let us exercise the magic of software. For Microsoft, that means taking something like Office and going from documents to deep insights, taking something like search and going from links to answers to task solutions. So software has only achieved a very small portion of what we want it to do, and even you could say what we need it to do. If you look at things like climate modeling, energy innovation, so much that this field has to contribute to solving broad science problems. I thought just as a kickoff, I'd give you 4 examples of things that I work on at the foundation before we go into the Q&A, and really highlight how in each of those areas it's software and digital approaches that are letting us be very ambitious. The Gates Foundation really focuses in 2 areas. One is education. That's primarily focused in the United States. And then the other is a series of global issues focused on the poorest in the world, including disease. That's by far our biggest thing, over $2 billion a year that we spend there. Agriculture, finance, sanitation, a variety of things that relate to the poorest. So let's just start with education. Last week I was down with Saul Kahn talking about the work he's doing with his Khan Academy website. The foundation's been the biggest funder of various MOOCs to see what can be done, not just for the type of people, the more elite students who are probably the first-time users of those systems, but also looking down at the students who may not make it through college, where remedial math, remedial writing classes really discourage them. And they have a hard time thinking through what are their skill sets and how do they match up to a profession that might be high paying. They have a hard time organizing their time and their finances to make sure that they're getting through for those things to work. And what we're seeing is that not only at the course level itself, to help model what the student knows and interact with them in a way that is encouraging, but even in that idea of the career decision, what are the credentials they need, or even monitoring to see if they don't show up for a class, immediately engaging with them, ideally in an inexpensive digital way, but perhaps knowing that the counselor needs to go in there and talk to them about their career goals. The United States has the highest dropout rate in higher education of any rich country. We actually are fairly middle of the road in terms of the percentage that go to higher ed, but we drop to below average in the percentage that graduate because of our uniquely high dropout rates. And of course, at the same time, we have a financial conundrum that if we're going to give more people college education, the cost is going up and the financial resources for that aren't generally available. So taking the courses, things like math, letting you know where you are, making it more personalized, drawing in your teacher to see what you've been doing. A lot of excitement there, and so we're funding that. Over in the health area, we work on diseases like HIV, malaria, all the childhood killers, pneumonia, diarrhea. And for us, disease modeling is a big area. We have a gigantic Windows cluster machine where we do stochastic modeling. We built a group of about 25 people that work with other universities on disease modeling. So things like weather, transport, mosquito populations, immune system state, a very rich model because our goal with a couple diseases, first with polio and then with malaria, is to actually go for total eradication. So understanding what tools do we need, drugs, bed nets, killing mosquitoes in the case of malaria. In the case of polio, it's looking at the genetics of the virus, seeing where it's spreading, understand how the kids move around, what we need to do to boost their immune systems. Those tools will make all the difference in terms of developing the confidence in what we do and coming up with the right tactics out in the field. Another example is agriculture. There it's genetics, where we're looking at the crops coming up with some very important improvements. We're putting things like vitamin A and iron into the crops. Bananas in Uganda within about 3 years will have those micronutrients. That's very important. We're putting in disease resistance. A big crop in Africa is cassava. There are 2 diseases that are now wiping out about 30% of the production. And it's not just a numeric thing that, it's 30% across the continent. It's some farmers who this crop, which is sort of their backup crop, they have a complete wipeout. And that means that they really are destitute, not able to feed their family. Well, by putting in some additional genes, in this case an RNAi interference technique, we're able to block these diseases. And so how do you get that out? How do you make sure people feel, from a regulatory point of view, that's going to be safe and available? Very tough challenge. We also in crops put in more drought resistance. We put in rice a thing called submergence tolerance. That's actually one of our great success stories. We now have 18 million farmers in Asia who plant a variety of rice that if it gets submerged, will just stop, not die off, and then when the water goes down, it resumes growing. All the rice varieties before that, when there was submergence, they would just die off. That's a good one because people can see how magical it is, and so it's had a higher rate of adoption than any of the new crop work that we've done. A final area to mention is in finance. Of course, consumers in the rich world have account balances and credit cards and things that let them plan ahead, borrow money when they need to. For the very poorest, those institutions don't exist. Now there's been an attempt through microfinance to create some of that, at least on the loan side. It hasn't been good on the savings side. It hasn't been able to embody programs that are unique for things like agriculture and retail. And as we move to cell phone-based digital currency, though, the transaction costs can be brought down a lot. One of the problems with microfinance is that the interest rates, even if you don't have defaults, because of processing overhead, is well over 15% a year. And so it's very difficult to find economic activity that can overcome that cost structure. When we move it into digital form, then we get it down to below 5%. And so it makes a big difference, but it also allows us to be creative so that when I sell my crop after the harvest, it advises me to set aside the money for the seed and the fertilizer and even makes that deposit. So it gives me some way to look forward to what I need to do to make sure I'm managing my money in the right way. We have one country, which is Kenya, that the economy is moving to digital currency. It's called M-Pesa, something that the foundation and the UK aid department were behind. And it's amazing once it gets to critical mass. It's like credit cards or debit cards, but you can transfer person to person, a small shopkeeper can set up, and we can instrument what's going on with that economy in a way that wasn't possible in a currency-based approach. And lots of innovative products are coming out that serve the very poorest. So even progress for the 2 billion most in need in health, agriculture, and all these different areas really are going to be dependent on the kind of rich computer science, software-driven advances that you work on. So that I think the opportunities are quite phenomenal, particularly as we can get commercial companies like Microsoft working with you and take your great work and get it out into products that can help millions of people. So thanks for coming, and now let me ask Rick out so we can start the Q&A section.
Please welcome today's moderator, Rick Rashid, Corporate Vice President at Microsoft.
See, my real job is to bring out the water. I was told that behind the scenes. So I'm going to be moderating the question and answer period with Bill. Let me just talk for a couple of seconds about logistics. So instead of microphone stands, we're having microphone people because we were told that stands were not appropriate for the staircases. So if you have questions for Bill on these topics, you go into the aisles, you go up to the person, they look like they're in red shirts, and they have a microphone so that you can ask your questions. So I would ask you to queue up behind those people. And in the meantime, I'm going to start out the questioning while we're getting things organized here and ask Bill a question on my own. So Bill, you're sort of in a unique position because of the foundation and having a chance to really get to see some of the best researchers in the world working on a wide variety of topics. There's an incredible talent level, the different approaches that people are taking, different things that they're working on. Are there things that you see that are particularly encouraging to you? And on the other side of the coin, are there things that you see that may concern you?
Well, I have to say, I mostly see positive things. I think historically, we didn't do a very good job of taking the needs, the problems, and getting that description in front of the scientists who could help solve the problem. So outside of computer science, we had a problem with vaccines that keeping them cold was really hard. And as soon as we showed that to people who understood about multi-layer insulation, great sort of super thermos type things, they invented a way for us to take the vaccines without using any energy, electricity, propane, any of that, keep those vaccines cold. And so I think we're doing a better job of, whether it's things like Kickstarter in the rich world or the equivalents in the for developing things, getting people excited. I do think it's amazing to me that certain problems don't get attention for long periods of time. So for example, take online education. Why is it that in the last 3 years this MOOC phenomenon, was there some big breakthrough that took place? Not really. There was a little bit of work on adding some interactivities to the video. And once that got to a critical mass, then there was enough activity for people to look at the tools of collaboration, the answer analysis. And so I think we're moving maybe 10 times faster now to solve those problems than we were just 3 or 4 years ago. So it says if you can get something going that's decent enough and highlight to the field the importance of it, then you can kind of galvanize a lot of activity. For the diseases that the foundation works on, these are very small communities. I mean, you could put all the malaria people in the world is like 100 total people. And that's nice in a way, because everybody knows everybody. They don't all like each other, but they do know each other, and the kind of different approaches are kind of finite in nature. But more and more people are getting educated. We're able to share information globally in a better way. We have a deal with China where any science we see in their country that may help poor people, if we put $1 in, they'll put $2 in. We have a similar arrangement with Brazil. So although the best research is still in Europe and the United States, it's becoming more of a global activity. And the software embodiment of a lot of these problems is bringing in people who wouldn't have been able to contribute before.
Great, thanks. Well, I think we have a question here in the center.
All right. Patrick Bowdish, Hasselblad Institute. I really like what you said about massive online courses. I think there's tremendous potential there. And I've spent a lot of time with my friends debating this topic. At the same time, it's very interesting to see also, I think there's going to be very interesting side effects also on this country and the countries around it, in the sense that teaching itself may change quite dramatically. And I was curious to hear more about the kind of the bigger picture for additional thoughts you had on this.
Well, yeah, the question is, teaching has many different aspects. One aspect is the big lecture. And there's definitely a view that will become less like individual performances of live music and more like recorded music, where there's a set of people who do it extremely well, get very big budgets to edit it, do the great experiments and those things. So like going back to Walter Lewin's physics course, which was the MIT Open Courseware Initiative, about 100 times more people watched him than watched place-based activity. And so taking that and raising the quality of it and making it available for free, that's clearly going to happen. But of course, if we think of that as the only part that goes on in learning, we'd be missing, where kids are doing problems, when they're in labs, where they're in study groups, where they're discussing topics. Many things don't fit that big lecture format. So how we take the digital technology and take those other aspects is fascinating to me. One thing that our foundation tracks a lot is this dropout phenomena. And what's incredible is that the so-called for-profit sector, although they've been properly admonished for their over-marketing, over-promising, in some cases suggesting people would get high-paying careers that they're not likely to get. Because they are sort of profit-driven, the way they track students and see exactly what's going on, they call you within a few minutes if you don't show up for something. That kind of hand-holding, some of which is embodied digitally, is a best practice. And so public universities haven't had that idea of, okay, what is the state of this student? What's all our evidence about how we need to intervene or help or things of that nature? So digital is in many areas. For elite students, people who would have bought, Learning Company, Great Courses type lectures, this is a golden era, the ability to learn a lot of topics. I find it just absolutely phenomenal. And we're seeing as we take knowledge like public health knowledge, get that up online, we're able to raise, say in sub-Saharan Africa, where the access to this material has been very poor, or even proving your competence against this material, there's been no ability to do it. It's quite revolutionary in terms of driving competence into health departments that were just isolated and not able to know what best practices were. So, we're on the beginning of something really quite profound, even though the temptation to oversimplify it is quite great.
I think we have a question here on the left.
Hi, I'm Ganesh from IIT Bombay. You mentioned that there's substantial work on online courses for the US. Now, what about countries like India? Just to bring to your attention, in India we have more engineering colleges than the US and China put together. And a lot of students in colleges are quite disillusioned about what they would like to do. And there is also kind of narrowing down of the funnel as you go to these cities. So students are left with very less opportunities. So, so my question is, what about online courses in countries like India? And also importantly, beyond colleges, there are also data centers in villages spread across a country like India where a lot of data gathering happens. So there's also a case for capacity building at these data centers so that data analysis, using machine learning, data mining, can be performed in a decentralized manner. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, at the end of the day, a lot of education is about getting a credential that helps with your employability. And the gold standard for that today is you go to a university where you spend time physically, and the idea of how you learned it and what you learned and the proof that you have this ability, those are tied together. I see those things decoupling, that the way you prove that you have certain skills can be very straightforward, and there can be a lot of people who are competing to help you gain that knowledge. Certainly this is going to be a global phenomena. The challenge of educating all the people who should be educated is much worse once you get outside the US, although the economics here are the most grueling. There are other countries participating in these things, but having scanned the landscape, the US is the place where the most interesting stuff is happening right now. Now that stuff is all localizable. I was down at Cannes, we were looking at the Spanish version, the Portuguese version, the Turkish version, the Danish version. It's not that hard when you do these things to make these incredibly global in nature. Now making them appealing, making them rich, making them deep, that's what's hard. The IIT lectures are available. They've been videotaped. But if you want to see some lectures that you might not make it to the end, if it's optional for you to watch, there's quite a few examples in there. Just sticking a camera in front of somebody who's got a captive audience, doesn't measure up to what's really going to be necessary in terms of being one of these lectures that contributes on a very, very broad basis. So, given the cultural focus on education, in the Asian countries, the adoption rates and some of their own innovations are going to be really huge. And as you say, it's not just for four-year college, it's also for vocational type activity, it's for the high school level. The high school and the university stuff have been a bit decoupled. The K through 12 has been mostly stuff like Khan and really kind of trying to engage the student with game type technology, whereas the university stuff is more of the MOOC thing. But that boundary is a pretty soft boundary as well.
I'm going to take a question from the right side here.
Thank you. Mr. Gates, my name's David Lovell. I'm from CSIRO and the Australian Bioinformatics Network. I've got a lot of things to say thank you for, your work, and I want to say thanks in particular for the work of the Foundation. I understand your daughter's about to go to university, facing some career and educational choices. And one of the things that I've come to understand is that when people cast themselves in narrow terms, I'm a computer scientist, or I'm an electrical engineer, or a bioscientist, or something like that, that doesn't quite seem to address what I think the world needs, which are people who have talents across a spectrum of disciplines and the ability to integrate knowledge from these disciplines and actually create meaningful solutions that are more than just, a hammer looking for a nail. So, I probably should have thought better about the actual question I'm going to ask you, but it speaks to this sort of multifaceted nature of education and collaboration. Do you have some thoughts about whether society is well served by seeing education cast in these roles of specific disciplines? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, fortunately, society, a very small percentage of society can do the innovations that benefit society very broadly. And so the education that we provide to make sure innovation goes at full speed, and the education we provide to make sure people are kind of employable in a way that's satisfactory for them, both the work and the economics of it. Those are almost two separate questions. The people who are going to do the deep innovations, yes, a lot of them will be polymathic. They will be, unusually strange people who learn a lot of things and therefore able to reason across the boundaries of two subject areas. I mean, just look, in biology, how much physicists came in there. In the global health work I do, a lot of the top people have both an MPH and an MD. And just think about the number of years they had to go to school, and they have to have been out in the field for 3 or 4 years to see things that do and don't work. When you meet these people, you kind of go, wow, how did you gain all that knowledge? I do think this is a wonderful period of time for those things. I mean, if you want to learn, when I want to learn about the ocean or meteorology or game theory or, just knot theory, there are great courses, so boom, 24 hours later, I know a little bit about those topics. I can test my knowledge. So what society, if people have that type of interest and inclination, sure, we should nurture it, but we don't want to push everybody down that path. But that's where a lot of the deep innovation is going to come. It's interesting, as my daughter goes to these universities, they're all saying, oh, you can design your own major and we don't force you to do anything and stuff like that. It's an interesting trade-off, how open-ended these things should be. I'm a big believer that you ought to have at least 1 or 2 subject areas that you actually know something about in a pretty deep way. Like everybody should know machine language, of course.
Not microcode. Yeah. A question from the center, please.
My name is Bertrand Meyer from ETH in Zurich. My question is about IP. It's clear that so some of the issues that developing countries face are IP related, both intellectual property related, both for, say, drugs, but also for software. And in fact, a number of countries have enacted open source only mandates. So I assume you must run into some contradictions or at least some tensions between your background at Microsoft with proprietary software and your current charitable work in this respect. And my question is, how do you see the combination between open source, free software on the one hand, and proprietary software on the other hand? And more generally, are there specific IP rules that should apply to emerging countries, or should they just follow exactly the same rules and use the same tools under the same conditions that we all use?
Well, thank God for commercial software. It actually funds salaries, gives people jobs, terrible stuff like that. And thank God for free software. Free software, lets people get things out there you can play around, build on. And so, the two work very well in a nice common ecosystem. And no, I don't see a big difference country to country. It's very similar to what we do in the foundation at this point. We've saved about 10 million lives that otherwise wouldn't have been saved. And our goal for the next decade is 50 million. But we never would have been able to do that except for our partnership with the pharmaceutical companies. So thank God for patent laws that allow them to invent drugs that they get to sell, that then they get to hire researchers. They are phenomenal at understanding the drug libraries, the assays, the things like that. And in fact, none of their patents exist in any of these developing countries. So we never, contrary to what you might think in the press, we never run into IP problems. Not a single time on a single thing. Because in the poor countries we work in, the poorest 90 countries, nobody files patents, nobody enforces patents. It's great. It's essentially a transfer of people buying drugs in rich world who are now enabling these things to be done at marginal cost. So all the vaccines we do, we understand the marginal cost, and we make sure that those, that's exactly what the pricing is to the lowest tier. In the same way that, say, a commercial software provider, we give the software away basically free to these educational projects, student-based activities. So you can do the tiering that actually, when you're in an intellectual property world where you want to fund the R&D, that works pretty well. So, I think intellectual property, complex topic, but, the value of the patent system of allowing those pharmaceutical companies to exist, allowing the agricultural innovators, the people who really get drought, really get salt tolerance, those guys doing those proprietary seeds have given us access to that knowledge to use for the poorest. And that's why we're so optimistic about dealing with new climate conditions and helping these poor farmers.
So no contradictions and no tensions.
Well, the world it's a complex system. Anybody who thinks getting rid of it would make the world better off, I can certainly tell you that's crazy. Anybody who thinks we run into problems helping the poorest because of these things, I'd like to know what they're talking about. The mix of commercial with free, without any coercion, a country forcing it to be one model or the other, my view is it's working very, very well.
Question over on the right.
Emma Brunskill from Carnegie Mellon University. I was wondering if you think there's a role for a tighter coupling between some of the education initiatives you've been doing as well as the financial services. So trying to better couple the educational offerings with economic opportunity, particularly in low resource areas.
Well, education in a broad sense, there's two key factors. One is the personnel system. That is, are the people who go into the education system well trained? Are they measured in terms of how good they are? Are they given an understanding of what the best practices are? And so the average quality rises up to that of the exemplars. And in fact, there's a lot of technology enablement that can be done to help that personnel system work well. Most educational personnel systems are run very, very poorly. In South Africa and in India, teachers don't show up about 25% of the time. In Mexico, the teachers union wouldn't tell the government who is employed. Now, just 6 months ago, they were taken out of that position. So the political willingness, particularly for K through 12 in developing countries, to run a good personnel system, just getting the basics right can make a huge difference. And some Asian countries have done that very well, better than the US. And most poor countries have done it even worse. And we're just talking about very basic things there. bringing in technology will make a difference. There's a very exciting company called Bridge International, which is a private school in Kenya that uses a tablet-driven approach so that their teachers are all going through a very specific set of activities, and it's very well monitored. And it's amazing to see how quickly they were able to branch and the comparison of them to the public system and how that can be done. So fixing, when you go into a poor country, you want to fix health, you want to fix agriculture, you want to fix education, you want to fix governance. It's the magic blend of those things, all of which reinforce each other. If you have ill health, you tend to have all those other things worse. It's those things that get you on the path to what, the good news is most of the world now lives in middle-income countries that to some degree, like Brazil, Mexico, China, have gotten these things right. There's about a third of the world lives in countries where these things haven't come together. And it's clear that innovation, particularly technical innovation, new vaccines, new seeds, monitoring things to make sure government workers do what they're supposed to, including education, that we can make much faster progress to get these people out of these poverty traps now than ever before.
So Bill, we've got a question from the streaming audience. So what role do you think wearable technology is going to have in education?
It'll help you cheat, I guess. Wearable technology. The word wearable, I mean, glasses that project onto your eyes, things that can monitor whether you're getting nervous during the test. I think of wearable technology as a very cool thing, but I don't really couple it that much to education. I think the way that you'll be able to review what you've learned, have the system understand the state of your knowledge, that's a very good thing. But I'm not sure how I connect that to wearable.
Maybe you could check to see how your pupils dilate when they ask you the questions, and see
Whether
whether you
the
really
truth.
know the answer or not. I always used that when I was a professor. Question on the left.
Hi, Gordon Wyeth from Queensland University of Technology in Australia. Mr. Gates, you wrote, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago in Scientific American about